I'm Dave Levenson. I'm a member of the Senior Center. This is an Enigma encryption machine. What is Enigma? It's an encryption and decryption device. It was used by Germany during World War II. It's not a communications device. It does not send a message anywhere. It does not receive a message from anywhere. But what it will do is translate a message that anyone can read into a message that you can't read by just scrambling all the letters, turning them into stuff that isn't readable. A message that everyone can read is called clear text. When you pass it through a machine like this, what comes out is what's called ciphertext. This particular machine was invented by Arthur Scherbius, a German engineer, and he applied for a patent on this machine in 1918. The market that he intended it for was the banking industry. There was one other significant event that happened in 1918. In November of that year, World War I, or the Great War as it was known back then, came to an end with the surrender of Germany. That led to a lot of soul searching in Germany. The German military wanted to know, why did we lose? What could we have done better? And so they put a lot of effort into studying everything that might have gone wrong and what we could do if there were ever another war to make it better. And one area that they focused on was the security of military communications. So they looked for a way to make communications more secure. And of course, one of the options that they looked at was Arthur Scherbius' machine. What they did with the machine in order to make a military version of it was a couple of things. They put it in this nice little wooden box with a hinged cover on it and a handle on the front, which was their way of making it portable. They also made it battery operated. This machine has today a couple of flashlight batteries. Back then they would have been lead acid batteries, so that it doesn't need to be plugged in. And finally, they made a modification to the machine, which I can show you. They added this feature to the front of the machine. It wasn't on the civilian version of the machine. That is a plug board. In German they called it a schteckerbrot. And what it does is it gives you an additional layer of encryption beyond what the machine does internally. To use this machine, you need two things. You need a machine just like it. You also need a key. But in order to encrypt a message, you need to have a code, a key, which is known by the recipient. So you need a way of having the key known at both ends of the communication. What the Germans did was they published a code book, and they made sure that every field unit had a copy of it. And the book had a new key for every day of the year, and the key was changed every morning at midnight. Once everybody knew what today's key was, if some commanding officer wanted to send battle orders to a remote field unit, he would compose a message, probably in writing, hand it to a cipher clerk. The cipher clerk would type the message on this keyboard, and for each letter that's typed on this keyboard, one of these lights would light up. So if I press the letter A, you'll notice that a D lights up. I'll press the letter W, and we get a V, and so on. And so what's on that second sheet of paper is this random string of letters that doesn't spell anything, that isn't meaningful to anyone who reads it. That piece of paper goes to a radio operator who gets out his telegraph key and transmits those letters using Morse code. At the field unit where it's received, somebody types the same letters into the keyboard, the letters that were in the ciphertext, and the lights will display the clear text. How does the machine actually do that? Well, to explain that, first of all, I'm going to say that electrically the machine isn't much more complicated than an ordinary flashlight. Here what we have is 26 switches, one for each key, and 26 light bulbs, one for each letter. In between, the wiring is deliberately scrambled, and that's how the transposition occurs. When I press a key, I close one of 26 circuits. That energizes one of the plugs on this plug board. If there's a jumper plugged into that plug, the other end of that jumper will be plugged into a different letter. And so of the 26 wires that come out of the keyboard, one of them gets energized. A different one is energized by the time it has passed through the plug board. Then 26 wires come out of the plug board, and they appear on a stationary disk. Stationary disk located right here in the machine. The stationary disk has 26 terminals on it, and I'm going to take one of these out. Of those 26 terminals, one of them will be energized because it corresponds to the key switch that was closed as translated by the plug board. I'm not sure you can see it, but right here are the 26 contacts on the stationary disk. One of them will be energized, and it will be connected by physical contact to one of the 26 pins on this rotor. The rotor has 26 pins on one side and 26 contacts on the other. Inside the rotor, there are 26 wires. Each wire connects one of these pins to one of these contacts. But the wires are scrambled. The one that's on this pin is not connected to this contact, but to some other contact. So when the signal comes in on one of these pins, it comes out on a different one. And when it comes out, it goes into a second rotor, which is built exactly the same way, but has a different scramble of wires inside it. That one passes the signal on to one of 26 wires in a third rotor. So we've now transposed it 3 different times. It then goes into this thing, which doesn't rotate, but it also has 26 terminals on it. But on this one, there are 13 wires. Each one connects one of these pins to one other pin. We don't offhand know which one is connected to which, but they're wired in a standard way. This is called a reflector. When the signal comes in on one of its pins, it comes back out on some other pin. And where does it go? Well, it goes back into the the left-hand rotor, which again transposes it into the next rotor, which transposes it into the next. It comes back to the original stationary disk, back through the plug board on a different wire than it went out on, and eventually finds its way to one of the light bulbs. To make things a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting, each time a key is pressed, the first rotor advances 1 step, which means all of its transpositions just moved to a different transposition. And you'll notice that each time I press a key, the first disk steps forward once. And you'll notice that if I keep pressing the same key, it causes a different light to go on for each depression. At some point, as this rotor turns, once during its revolution, it will cause the second rotor to advance 1 step, so that by the time this rotor has gone 26 steps all the way around, the transposition is now being changed in the second rotor position. And the second one steps the third one the same way. Once per revolution, it will step the third rotor. Because of the way the reflector works, if an A turns into an S, if the rotors are in the same position, an S will turn into an A. And that is why the same machine can be used to encrypt and decrypt, assuming that the key is the same. And what exactly is the key? Well, the key consists of 4 parts. The first part is when you get the machine, when it's brand new, it comes with 5 rotors in a little box. On any given day, you choose 3 of the 5, and those 3 get put in the machine itself. So the first piece of the key is choosing which of the 5 rotors are going to go in the machine. The next part of the key is choosing the order in which the rotors go in the machine. The rotors are all identical. They have numbers on them so that you can tell them apart, and their internal wiring is different. But physically they're the same, so that you can put them in any order. So having chosen 3 rotors, you then get to choose in which order you place them. Next thing you do is each rotor has a little pin in it that you can move around, which determines at what point during its rotation the next rotor to its left will advance 1 step. And it turns out that there are 26 cubed possible rotor advance pin settings. And finally, you have 13 jumpers. There are 13 factorial, or about 6 billion different combinations of jumpers. So with 10 rotor choices and 6 rotor order choices and 26 cubed rotor settings and 13 factorial jumper positions, you actually end up with about 6.5 quadrillion possible keys. So how did the Allies manage to break the code and read the Germans' communications? Well, the first thing that they discovered was that the machine has an interesting design flaw. If the ciphertext is completely random, then it's theoretically impossible to break the code. But what comes out of this machine isn't completely random. And the reason for that is that because of the way the reflector works, no letter ever encrypts as itself. What that means is when I type the A, there are not 26 possible results, there are 25. Why is that important? Well, it turns out that if you have a particular word that you know is in the message, what you can do is start looking for a place where that word does not appear, where none of the letters in that word ever appear in the ciphertext. If you can find a place where that piece of known text, which might be today's date if it's in a military communications, it might be the name of the person it's addressed to, it might be his rank, it might be the name of his unit. The Allies knew a fair amount about what the Germans were sending, and so they could look for bits and pieces of known text in a message, and if they found any letter that matched, they knew that they were not looking in the right place yet, and so they could move this known text. Known text, by the way, is called a crib. And by sliding the crib along the ciphertext, you could look for a case where nothing matches. And at that point, that's probably where the crib is located. A group of three Polish mathematicians began working on this machine very early in the World War II. At the time that Poland was occupied by Germany, their work came to an end. But they shared what they had done with the British. The British convened a group, they called it GCCS, the Government Codes and Ciphers School, and it was located at a place called Bletchley Park. And there they assembled a group of mathematicians and linguists and other experts to continue the work that the Poles had started. One of them in particular was a brilliant mathematician named Alan Turing. He realized that by using the non-randomness of the machine, the fact that it was a non-crashing code, meaning that a letter never encrypts as itself, you could narrow the key choice down quite a bit. And then what he did was he built a machine that basically does a brute force attack. His machine looked like 100 Enigma machines all operating electrically, so that he had 100 sets of 3 rotors, all of them spinning around, looking at the ciphertext and searching for an occurrence of a crib. And with that, he was able to try thousands and thousands of keys a minute. It was estimated that the work that was done at Bletchley Park by Alan Turing and the rest of the supporting staff there probably shortened World War II by a couple of years. One question that I'm often asked is, why is this machine here? How did it end up in Rio Rancho today? I'm going to refer to my father. His name was Arthur Levenson, and he was one of the Americans who was stationed at Bletchley Park along with the Brits during World War II. His service in Bletchley began in 1943, and so he was one of the people working on attacking the code of this machine. At the end of the war, after the Germans surrendered, the Allies launched a mission called TICOM. What TICOM did was they sent a group of people and a convoy of trucks into Germany, into a small town deep in the Black Forest, where the Germans had their version of Bletchley, where they were attacking the Allied codes. The purpose of TICOM was to discover whether or not they had broken our codes, and if they had not, how close had they come. And so the mission had 2 objectives. One was to seize equipment, and they seized, I think, about 10 tons of cryptographic equipment from this facility hidden away in the Black Forest. And they also brought back a couple of hundred people who worked there. They were considered prisoners of war. And my father was one of the participants in the TICOM mission. I can recommend 2 books for further study. There is a book called The Hut 6 Story, written by Gordon Welchman, who was directed that agency for several years. And there is a book by Andrew Hodges, a British historian, called Alan Turing, the Enigma. It is the story of Alan Turing's life, but it focuses very much on the work that he did on solving this machine during the war. That book was also the basis of the movie, The Imitation Game. And here we see that it's a portable machine. Pretty heavy to be portable, but that's the Army.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay.